We start off next door in Burundi, where the situation changed dramatically after the former head of intelligence services in the country, General Godfrey Niyombare, announced that he had overthrown President Pierre Nkurunziza as head of state. But officials from the office of the president in the country countered the announcement with claims that the coup d'etat had been foiled. Images out of Burundi have been showing crowds of people opposed to the president's bid to stand for another term dancing on the streets of major towns after hearing that President Nkurunziza had been deposed. The coup attempt took place as President Pierre Nkurunziza traveled to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, to attend the 13th Extraordinary EAC Heads of State Summit that convened to discuss the Burundi crisis. Reports indicate that President Pierre Nkurunziza has been unable to return to Burundi after the country's borders and airspace were closed. The escalating situation in Burundi has triggered demonstrations and riots that claimed the lives of more than 20 people over a period of the 18 days as it happened. Now, joining us live online is political analyst Frederick Goloba Mutebi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Goloba, following the EAC Heads of State Summit on Burundi crisis in Dar es Salaam, as an analyst, how do you see the situation panning out in as far as the role of the EAC is concerned?
Well, originally that summit had been planned, I think, to discuss the possibilities of finding an agreeable solution to all sides to this crisis. But it seems as if the occurrence of the coup has made that now irrelevant. Whatever discussion the heads of state would have been having would have been based on a set of assumptions that has now been overridden by the new developments. So it's very difficult to see what strategies they are now going to adopt, because if it is true that the coup in Burundi has succeeded, it is no longer an issue whether Nkurunziza wants to stand for elections or not. I think that the coup has now nullified that possibility. As to what happens to him from now on, I think that that's an open question. So as far as I'm concerned, it's difficult to predict or even foresee what the heads of state are going to do. They'll probably want to engage in dialogue with the new leadership in Burundi after it has emerged clearly as to who is leading the country, possibly to try and return the country to stability and peace as quickly as possible.
Okay, what does the military coup mean to a country that struggled with civil wars for more than a decade?
Well, I think that that's the last thing anyone would have wanted. And here I'm speaking for those of us or people like me who watch happenings from the outside.
Okay.
Possibly the Burundians who had got fed up with President Nkurunziza would have even been wishing for one. But in the general scheme of things, coups have become very unfashionable in Africa. They are no longer acceptable. And I think very soon we shall hear statements coming from the African Union and the EAC condemning the coup and calling on the coup plotters or coup stagers to return the country to democracy as soon as possible.
Okay, now there are reports that there are factions in the military still loyal to President Nkurunziza. Does this raise fears to spiral the violence out of control? What do you think?
Well, I think that that is always a possibility, except that one has to ask the question, if the faction that is loyal to President Nkurunziza decides to try and fight on to bring him back, the question for them is on whose behalf will they be bringing him back except for themselves? Because what we have seen in Burundi over the past 2 weeks or so is a clear demonstration, at least in the areas where demonstrations have been happening, that there is a large groundswell of opinion that is opposed to President Nkurunziza continuing to be in power. So the faction that supports him will have to find an answer to the question as to on whose behalf they want to bring him back. Now, it will also depend on the strength of the faction that is opposed to him, because here again one has to decide whether they want to engage in a factional war that is going to render the situation much worse, or if they want to reach some kind of accommodation and agree that the man is gone, now it's time to start afresh.
Okay, now just the last one. As you look at some of those pictures, people are rejoicing on the streets. Is there a possibility of elections so as to transfer the government from military to democracy, basing on the current situation in the country?
Yeah, I mean, look, in the event of any coup happening in any country, the coup must always be followed by elections at some point. I think the question that we can debate now is whether those elections are going to come earlier rather than later. My own hunch would be that the elections would come later because in the situation of a coup, the country has to be stabilized again. Decisions have to be made as to whom power gets hands over, who leads the transitional government. So there is a whole range of questions that need to be answered. But ultimately, the country must return to elections. That is inevitable. The new leadership will be pressurized to make sure that happens as quickly as practicable.
Thank you so much for speaking to RTV. That is Frederick Goloba Mutebi that was giving us a view on Burundi crisis as per the situation going on right now.